Hello, my name is Kiriath, Herald of Nurgle, and an actual human plague bearer, again before he has blessed me a second time with a second dose of pneumonia, because I didn't have enough of it the first time. Thanks very much, Nurgle, you son of a bitch. Anyway, today we are going to talk about the Battle for Mars box set again, because we have some new information now. We have a new knight, we have a new Cryptek, and I thought it would be fun for us to just essentially speculate wildly about the size of the new knight, speculate how much it costs, and whether in fact it makes the idea of a Battle for Mars box even more plausible than it was, in that actually I didn't think it was that plausible at all, I just like the idea. But now, I think there is actually a genuine chance for this to be a real thing, and I explain why, obviously. And also, we're going to take a look at Inquisitor Eisenhorn, and we'll have a brief chat about the leak process for Warhammer 40k models, because it's interesting and kind of funny and almost like a conspiracy theory, except not really, because I think it's a little bit too realistic to be a proper conspiracy theory. So, on we go. Oh, and I apologise for the obscene number of cuts that you're going to see in this video. I keep coughing my lungs up and it's terrible, so sorry about that. Hopefully I don't miss any, because it sounds like death. Last week we talked about this. The possibility, or the kind of leak or rumour, that there was going to be a box set that was going to be Necrons versus Adeptus Mechanicus. Now, when we talked about it, I said that I felt it was unlikely, but I would really like to see it. Some of it does make sense. I mean, if we follow the leaked schedule that we talked about a couple of weeks ago, then it would come out around the same time as the Necron Codex, which, you know, that would make sense to me. But there are several things stacked against it. The fact it doesn't contain any Space Marines, although someone pointed out that there was that sort of separate box game that was Execution Force, so it was the Assassins versus the Imperial Assassins versus Chaos, which admittedly, yeah, true, that was a box that did not have any Space Marines in it. But historically the box sets have featured Space Marines in some capacity from a variety of chapters against a variety of enemies, and this would break with that. Obviously that is not a problem, that would be really good. In fact, I said repeatedly how good it would be. Necrons and Adeptus Mechanicus make a really good, I was going to say like partnering, but they make a good partnering because they don't make a good partnering. That's the thing that makes them good. And there's the whole Void Dragon aspect of it, and just the idea of Necrons versus Adeptus Mechanicus for Mars is stellar, and I was really hoping it would be true. I think it's a lot more plausible now. I think it's a lot more possible, specifically because of two models that we saw that Games Workshop announced at the Las Vegas Open. And that is the new Cryptek, the new Necron Cryptek, and the new Imperial Knight, the smaller Knight, the Knight Armiger, or Knight Armiger. I think it's Armiger. No one's corrected me so far, so I'm going to stick with Armiger. Now, depending on the price point of those two models, I could easily see those being included in the box set. One of the things that I found particularly interesting was the paint scheme of the Knight Armiger. Now, when the Imperial Knights were first being talked about and were first released, there was of course a variety of paint schemes to choose from, but one of the ones that seemed to get pushed a fair bit was House Terran, I believe it was. And of course House Terran, I think, also had that ridiculous set of rules for a knight household, which was 5 Imperial Knights. I found it interesting that the new small knight was not painted in the green colour scheme. I can't remember what house that is. It wasn't painted in the same colour scheme as House Terran. It was in fact painted in a very Mechanicus based colour scheme. It was, by the look of it, a Adeptus Mechanicus owned and operated Imperial Knight. That could be reading a little bit too much into it, but I found that to be just an interesting detail. Could be meaningless, or it could be a small indicator of things to come. Now, having looked at that knight a few more times, I think I've got a fair idea as to the scale of it, as to the size of it. So, this is my Imperial Knight, well, my assembled Imperial Knight anyway. And by looking at a couple of the things on the smaller knight and comparing them to the normal, regular size knight, I feel like it'll probably end up coming up to about eye height on this fella here. So about to there. But that would be its tallest point. So where its carapace extends to on this one, so about here, would end up being around eye height on this one. If you actually look at this, like the size and shape of it, it has a slightly thinner profile than this knight, and I think when it comes to carapace size, if we turn this guy like that, where the grey and black meet there, if we angle it and go from that point where that meets that seam there and down to there, I think that is going to be the size of the carapace on the smaller knight. That would certainly make sense to me anyway. Shoulder pad wise, I think, now they've got a slightly different shape, the shoulder pads on the smaller knight from what I can see, and I reckon probably about half the size of the shoulder pads, but in a slightly more rounded way. The back was also kind of interesting because it seemed to lack some of the more kind of bulging out parts that you find on this knight, and it seemed to be a lot smaller in profile. Like, I think it was about that wide at the widest part. That's a little more difficult to tell on the back, I found, but that would certainly make sense. So, given the size of it, given the scale of it, and this is rough estimation, obviously, I haven't got one side by side because I don't have one with me. I reckon probably that it would still be relatively expensive for a model, but not too bad. Somewhere north of 50 quid. Not half the price of Imperial Knight, probably a bit over half the price of the Imperial Knight. But if you were doing a box set that was around 80 to 90 pounds, which quite a few of these have been in the past, then you could conceivably fit that smaller knight in a Battle for Mars box along with the new Cryptek and some other models like, I don't know, Immortals or something. I can't remember what Necron stuff is anti-tank, if I'm honest. I had a Necron army, but it was when they had their first ever full codex, so that information is so hilariously outdated that I don't even know why I'm bothering trying to remember. But generally we do see savings in these boxes, these little narrative collections that Games Workshop have done in the past, so I would expect to see the same for this. Actually, a smaller knight, a Cryptek, and some Necron infantry for around 80 to 90 pounds, that seems completely feasible to me. The fact that the models are being revealed at the same time, I think, lends a certain credence to the idea of there being this box set. It's more feasible than it was by quite a stretch. I think the reveal of the smaller knight and the reveal of a new Cryptek is really pointing towards it being more likely than not, which I'm really happy about. Now, I hope that my kind of putting 2 and 2 together and getting 5 actually turns out to be accurate in this case, because as I've said before, the idea of that box is really good and I would like to see it. Obviously though, that is just guesswork. I'd say it's semi-educated guesswork, but it's still guesswork all the same. And I'm not saying it will happen, only that it is far more plausible than it was before. I do hope it's true, however. Okay, so let's take a look at Eisenhorn then. Come on then, let's see what the lad's like. Oh yes, oh yes. Okay, so look, that is a nice model. I defy anyone to tell me that that is not a really, really nice model. That is a proper job, that. I really, really like it. Something I'm actually really liking about it is the fact that, yes, that is Eisenhorn. That is ripe for turning into your own Inquisitor, or even doing, like, you could mess with that and you could turn it into any number of badass things. It could even be used as a Imperial Guard General, I reckon. If you messed with it enough, and if you chopped a few bits off, maybe switched out some iconography and things, you could make that into quite a few things. Now, I think they've done just a staggeringly good job. Games Workshop are churning out some really nicely done miniatures at the moment, and this is absolutely one of them. This is one of those things where, fanboyish though it may make me sound, I would buy this just to own it and paint it. And I'll be honest, I was going to say my standards for models are pretty high. They are high, but they are being consistently met at the moment with some really good stuff, this absolutely included. So yeah, I just really, really like that. I'm getting the same kind of I need to have this so I can paint it vibe as I got from, what's his name, Trajan Valoris. I'm getting that same thing of, even if I don't intend to ever actually use it, having it would be nice. So yeah, I think they've done a really, really good job with that. It looks really, really good. Now, let's just talk very briefly about the leak process. Okay, so we see this a lot. And I don't think this is a conspiracy theory. I think it's probably a reasonable thing to think. We see things happen in a particular order when it comes to especially big model releases. So I would count this as a big model release. I mean, Eisenhorn is incredibly popular. It is a household name in terms of 40k lore, in terms of Black Library publications. It's incredibly well known. Eisenhorn is not just some random dude. There is weight to the name. Similarly, when we saw the Estrella Super Heavy Tank, it was the first Primaris specific thing from Forge World, and it was the first grav vehicle that Space Marines had access to, excluding things like Land Raiders and jet bikes, obviously. And there's been a similar cycle for big leaks, for big releases, which is a on-the-wonk photo, taken slightly blurry with a bit of noise, and just slightly out of focus. Taken from White Dwarf, obviously, and then within 24 hours, sometimes less, the Warhammer Community site updates, as it has this time, with a proper, decent photo of whatever the leak was of. Now, I'm not saying that the Warhammer Community team, or Games Workshop as a whole, is planting leaks. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying they're doing that at all. I'm not saying they're doing it themselves. But the response time is fantastic, and the cycle goes as follows. The leak comes out, everyone jumps on it, websites, YouTube channels, like myself. We essentially do Games Workshop's marketing for them. People get excited, they're like, I can't wait to see this properly, this looks quality, and then we get the full picture, and people go, I was right to be excited to see that properly, because it looks awesome. We then make a video talking about how the, how the now really easy to see model is generally pretty fucking good, and the cycle continues. Now, I'm not saying this is a kind of, I'm never going to cover leaks or anything like that. No, nothing like that. But I will say, as I've said many times in the past, for how old the Warhammer Community site is, for how long Games Workshop have had a actual respectable web presence, which is like not long at all, in terms of the grand scale of the internet, Games Workshop are so late to the game. It's absolutely unbelievable when it comes to interacting with their fan base, with their community. And yet they are consistently absolutely killing it, because every time we see a leak like this, within 24 hours, we get to see the full model like we just have. Whether or not they are either creating the leaks themselves, doing nothing to stop the leaks, which I think is something that is absolutely reasonable to assume, that managers know when someone's got the latest White Dwarf open and they're just taking photos of it. They just don't do anything about it, because why would they? They're just doing a ridiculous job of building on the inevitable hype that comes from every time something like this happens. Obviously, I help contribute to that. Do I feel bad about it? Not really, no, because I want to talk about this stuff. That is one of the great things about 40k. It's sharing whatever's new. It's sharing new things about the hobby. It's sharing new models. It's sharing opinions about what's going on. And as such, I have no issue with assisting in that marketing, because if I didn't talk about stuff that was new with 40k, then we quickly run out of things to talk about when it comes to 40k. You know, that cycle of news and releases is one of the things that makes it such an exciting hobby to be part of. But that being said, they're doing a fucking ridiculous job with just the way that this cycle goes every single time. As I say, whether they're causing it or not, they're absolutely taking advantage of it in a big way, and I cannot help but kind of go, alright, yeah, you've done a decent job with that one. Anyway, let me know what you think about the chances of the Battle for Mars box being true now, based on the new information we have. Do you think I'm correct with the scaling of the Knight Armiger, or do you think I'm just talking out my arse, or does that seem reasonable? Including the price, what do you think of the price? That seem about right, about 50-55 quid? Be interested to see what you think about that one, because I think that's going to be the biggest interesting thing about it, really, the price of it. What do you think of the new Eisenhorn model? Is it quality? I mean, obviously it is quality, but I don't know why I'm asking you, because I'm sure you'd agree. And finally, the Games Workshop doing these leaks themselves, or are they just really good at capitalising on the fact that these leaks are happening? Let me know in the comments below. In the meantime, feel free to click anything you see in front of you on the screen, Patreon, subscribe, videos, all of that shite. Click it if you like, don't click if you don't want to. And in the meantime, I will see you for the next video. Toodaloo.